Hi everyone. On February 14th, the Holy Orthodox Church celebrates the memory of Saint Hilarion the New of Georgia. Now this is not the same Saint Hilarion of Georgia, who was a much more ancient saint, but is someone who was actually glorified in 2002 by the Holy Synod of the Georgian Orthodox Church. Our Saint Hilarion today had a rather adventurous life, although not necessarily one that he was seeking. He was born during the year of the American independence, 1776, and he was born to noble parentage. His parents, in fact, had him sent to his uncle, who was a hierodeacon, at the age of 6. Well, from age 6 on, he began to learn as much as he possibly could, but then, unfortunately, his uncle died, and he wasn't sure exactly where he was going to go. Now, he had heard that there was a seminary opening in Tbilisi, so he headed off to Tbilisi. But when he got there and talked to the archbishop there, well, he was not too impressed with the idea of St. Hilarion becoming a seminarian. He said, in fact, noticing his great desire for God, he said, "My son, go back to your home. There you're going to learn of the things of God much, much more than you will in a seminary." So St. Hilarion did return to his home, and in fact his parents had him married to a woman named Mariam, Princess Mariam. Now he was happily married to her for a couple of years, and then unfortunately she reposed. Well, things were difficult in that area of Georgia at this time. Russia had been annexing much of Georgia, and in fact had suggested that King Solomon II of Georgia, who ruled that part, also talk to his nobles and give his okay to the idea of being incorporated into Russia. Well, the nobles said no, and so King Solomon said, well, he told the Tsar, no, that's not going to happen right now. But it was with the agreement that upon his repose that portion of Georgia would be annexed to Russia. Well, when that finally happened, or at least when the time came close, it turned out a little bit differently. Russia tried to annex that portion of Georgia anyway. There was a lot of disturbance in that area at the time. And so King Solomon fled all the way down into Turkey in order to save his life. And at that time, St. Hilarion, who by this time had been ordained a presbyter, left with him because of his great love for him and stayed with him in Turkey until King Solomon reposed. Well, when King Solomon did finally repose, St. Hilarion went up into Moscow to be with his widow, who had been taken into semi-captivity, let's call it, and serve as her chaplain and as the chaplain for the in-exile Georgian court. Well, he stayed in Moscow for a while, but he was not very excited about court life. And so finally he determined that he was going to leave. And so he put on the garments of a beggar and took off and headed towards Mount Athos, where he was received at the Hilarion monastery and finally tonsured as a monk, none of them knowing what his previous rank was in terms of nobility or indeed of the priesthood. And so St. Hilarion tried to keep his identity secret, but then one day when he was kneeling in front of the famous Hilarion Mother of God icon, one of the people that knew him from the court that had also come to the monastery recognized him, and they bowed down before him and said, Your Honor, Your Majesty, all of these sorts of things. And so the word got out quickly that this was somebody who was quite well known and quite well important in Georgia. Well, this was too much for St. Hilarion to bear, and so he left the monastery and went out into the woods to live there in as quiet asceticism as he could. But the troubles of the world were not to leave him. At that time, when Turkey had been invading Greece and taken over large sections of it, and in fact the Turks were killing a lot of the Christian population, St. Hilarion could stand by no longer and watch this happen. So he was selected, along with another of others from the various monasteries of Mount Athos, to go in and speak to the Pasha, who was ruling the area at the time. And St. Hilarion at this point greatly desired to be martyred by an unbeliever. And so he took a number of days, 3 days in fact, and he was defending the Christian faith in front of this Pasha and belittling the fact that he was an unbeliever, because as it turned out, this Muslim was actually a Georgian who had been kidnapped by the Turks at a young age and converted to Islam. But the Pasha was having none of it. He was really quite angry with St. Hilarion and finally did sentence him to death. But then he was persuaded not to by some of his cohorts, who said, "But wait, he is noble, it is known. Let's just let him go." And so they did. So St. Hilarion at that point returned back to Mount Athos after having made many, many attempts to achieve martyrdom, where he lived till about the age of 88 or 89 years. And he was someone who was well respected at the time, lived up in a tower on Mount Athos to the end of his life. And in fact, one of his cell attendants was instructed that when he reposed, he was to take his body and bury it anonymously somewhere. Hide the grave. Don't let it known. But the cell attendant, fortunately for all of us, was disobedient in this case, and in fact revealed the location of St. Hilarion's grave. When in fact the time came that they were going to exhume the relics, they opened the grave, found his body whole and intact, with a marvelous fragrance coming from it. And in fact, several of the bystanders there saw a bright light that was coming from within the towered cell that St. Hilarion lived in. So this is a man who sought silence but was not granted it, who was born into great royal dignity but yet desired obscurity and still was not granted it until the end of his life. But it shows all of us that no matter what our station is, if we but pursue the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, our Lord will ensure that we are where He wants us to be at any given time. Bye-bye.